Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, this is Tim Donner with LNTV, and in their never-ending search for some evidence, any evidence, of some crime, any crime, by Donald Trump, and if not, some impeachable offense, almost anything will do, the investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller has spread its tentacles ever wider, as we discovered when the office of Trump lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen was raided by the FBI after Mueller issued a criminal referral to a U.S. attorney in New York. Joining us is LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. And Scott, tell us what happened in the world of Stormy Cohen in the last few hours or days.
Well, Tim, as always, I'm on top of the Stormy Daniels situation for Liberty Nation. So today, Tim, on Thursday, Michael Avenatti, who represents Stormy Daniels, filed a lawsuit in New York suing the government, basically suing the United States, saying that Ms. Daniels should be allowed to be a party to the proceedings involving the search warrant materials that were seized at Mr. Cohen's office. So just in layman's terms, what he said was, we need to be a part of this process. We need to be able to make arguments. We need to be able to be informed when hearings are and that sort of things. And that's what it would mean to be included in it. And the reason why he would have to sue to make that happen is because they're a third party. They presumably have nothing legally to do with those issues. But Mr. Avenatti has alleged that the materials taken from Mr. Cohen's offices include materials that are Stormy Daniels' attorney-client privilege products having to do with her previous attorney, the one who negotiated the initial non-disclosure agreement with Mr. Cohen. So that's what happened today. Yesterday, Mr. Cohen told the federal judge in California. So we've got an East Coast court and a West Coast court. On the East Coast, we have the court that's examining basically a criminal investigation, whether that's just Mr. Cohen or just Mr. Trump or both, or perhaps neither, although unlikely, that's possible. And on the West Coast, in Los Angeles, we have the civil suit, which is where Stormy Daniels has sued Donald Trump to get out of the non-disclosure agreement. Well, last week, Michael Cohen asked the court in that case to delay the proceedings. He said, can we get a 90-day delay here because of the search warrant and seizure? This implicates my rights. It was a kind of a way to say that he wanted to plead the fifth without actually doing so. And many legal observers, and I think myself included, believe that that was an attempt to be able to then say publicly that I haven't pled the fifth. Well, the judge in that case didn't like that and basically said, I need to know if you are going to plead the fifth or not by Wednesday. So Wednesday came and he did say to the judge that he was going to plead the fifth, and that would inform the judge then on how to rule on this request to stay the Stormy Daniels proceedings for the 90 days. Now, an interesting wrinkle in that is the judge in that hearing was told by Mr. Avenatti that they needed to move without delay because of Ms. Daniels' rights that were in question. And because she went on 60 Minutes and has already broken the agreement, the judge remarked in court that it didn't seem like she was really being affected by this agreement because she's out there talking about it. So that was yesterday and the week before.
Isn't it actually true that she is affected by the agreement in such a way that she now has more publicity than she's ever gotten in her life, which would presumably lead to more money, which would presumably lead to book deals, which would presumably lead to enlarged tours by her? The name of her tour is not something we need to necessarily share here, but I mean, isn't
she is, Tim, the number one adult performer by web ranking today. I checked yesterday.
By adult performer, you of course mean pornographic actress.
Sexually explicit, I think, is the preferred term by those artists in the area, Tim. Although I haven't I haven't done too deep a dive on that, but yeah. Well, look, just because she's a pornographic actress doesn't mean she's a liar, and doesn't, all it means is that she's a pornographic actress.
That's about it. That's about it.
That's about it, right? Yeah. I mean, it's salacious, and the still shots of her for the articles are better because of her wardrobe and profession. But I don't really think it matters in this instance. This is a case it's a simple case, I think, on the civil side about somebody who doesn't want to be held to the terms of an agreement that they agreed to and were paid to be bound by, and now thinks that there is a better opportunity elsewhere. Well, sorry, but I don't think that's kosher.
Too little, too late. Although, of course, the claim is that Donald Trump never actually signed the agreement. But let's move on to Michael Cohen.
Well, let me actually just interrupt there, if I might, Tim. I don't think we can just touch on that point and move on without talking about it. Whether or not Trump signed the agreement is not, I think, controlling as to whether there was an agreement in place. I think the court could and may very well will find that an agreement was in place, even though Mr. Trump maybe either didn't sign it or that Ms. Daniels doesn't have a signed copy. Because remember, we don't know if Mr. Trump signed the agreement or not. All we know is that that Ms. Daniels' side says that they don't have a copy signed by Mr. Trump. There could be 6 copies signed by Mr. Trump elsewhere.
So the fact that they don't have one signed by him is what you're saying doesn't prove that there wasn't one signed by him, only that they claim not to be in possession of one signed by him, correct?
That is true, and what is also true is even if he never did sign any copy of that contract, that doesn't mean that they win in court. In other words, it's not just a matter of saying he didn't sign it, therefore they win. It's an open question as to whether his signature actually is required to make that a valid contract. Based on my training and experience, I would say that there was a valid contract in place. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not room for debate around the margins, or that this judge may think the other way. But for my 2 cents, there was an agreement in place between the two of them for her to keep her mouth quiet and for him to give her $130,000. He paid up,
and he fulfilled. Right, he fulfilled his end of the term.
Yes, sir.
The terms of the agreement that required him to do certain things, including the payment of $130,000. Although, of course, the claim is that that agreement wasn't actually made with Trump, but was made with Michael Cohen, and Trump saying he didn't know anything about it. But that's something we could spend a long time going into. But I want to ask you this one, because we're in yet another teachable moment for those who want to know how our legal system and a constitutional republic operate. Michael Cohen on Wednesday pleaded the fifth, which means he does not want to or chooses not to incriminate himself or to possibly incriminate himself. Does that mean he's guilty?
Certainly not, Tim, and thank you for the opportunity to present it that way. So in a criminal proceeding, which is what's going on in New York, potentially, you can plead the fifth, and it can't be used against you, right? You can say, I don't want to speak to the police, and if there were ever a trial, they couldn't say, well, what did Mr. Cohen say when you asked him about this payment? And they can't say, oh, he refused to speak with us. They're not even allowed to broach that issue. You're just allowed to not speak, and that can't be used against you. In the civil side, it's completely the opposite. When he says, I anticipate taking the fifth on the civil case, that actually can be used against him, meaning the trier of fact, in this case, it's a judge, it could be a jury in some other case, can actually make an inference that, well, he's taking the fifth, that means that maybe he did something wrong, and we can assume that perhaps he did something wrong. So there's a bifurcation there. Now, within the context of either one, right, then there's the question of did he do something wrong because he took the fifth? And the answer is no. And I'll just ask everybody to think of every time they've seen a cop show on TV when they say, anything you say, you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can and will be used against you. And the reason why they say can and will is because there's no way that anything you say can be used to help you. If you're being arrested and you make a statement, those statements will very likely be used to discredit you. And in fact, there's a lawyer called Stephanie Hyens who had a great tweet I saw earlier today on this, and I'll just read it. And it says, until laymen understand that cross-examination uses inconsistencies between statements to undermine credibility at trial, anytime a right to silence is invoked, laymen will wrongly believe that silence equals guilt. Well, it doesn't equal guilt, and this is the best legal advice you're ever going to get. It's free, but it's worth a gold mine. Shut up. If you're being arrested, don't talk. And if you're involved in a potential criminal case, don't talk about it. Mr. Trump today, President Trump today, I think it was on Fox and Friends, said that Mr. Cohen had represented him in the Stormy Daniels matter. Even that kind of statement could be used in some future proceeding against Mr. Trump. The best advice is to say nothing. Mr. Cohen did the best thing he could by taking his own advice, or what truly would have been his own advice as a competent attorney, and pled the fifth here. We'll see. We've got a couple more developments coming down the road. We expect the judge to rule on the stay motion. This is the California civil case judge with very soon. And also there is a complaint that Stormy Daniels has said that Mr. Cohen defamed her. And Mr. Cohen filed a sort of counter complaint against that in California. And the judge in California is going to rule on that claim as well. So more to come pretty soon, but the big questions are still out there.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
So that's Scott Cosenza, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. You can read his writing about all things legal and constitutional on LibertyNation.com. I'm Tim Donner, and this is LNTV.
Liberty Nation. News and commentary, minus the propaganda. LibertyNation.com.